Welcome back, Netrunner fans, to part 2 of my Democracy and Dogma review. In this part, we're going to be looking at all the Corp cards in the pack. We're going to start off with a new 5-for-3 agenda for HB. This is Voting Machine Initiative. It's an initiative subtype. Place 3 agenda counters on it when you score it. When the runner's turn begins, you may spend a hosted counter. If you do, the runner loses a click if able. If you've heard me talk about 5-for-3s before, then you know that I'm generally very critical of them because I think that their abilities are just too weak. And this one is absolutely no exception. Let's talk for a moment about how we might be able to use the ability first. The main thing I'm seeing is that in HB, there are lots of click-related things, like clicking through bioroids. Generally speaking, if you have clicks, you're going to be in a better position against an HB deck. So this might help you to score subsequent agendas in that you could hit them on the right turn, like the turn after you install your agenda, to make them lose a click. That's going to make it harder for them to make the runs they need. It's going to make it harder for them to click through your ice. That said, this thing has a ton of problems. Why does it trigger at the beginning of the runner's turn? To me, it's kind of strange that you can't just use this as a paid ability like with most other agenda counter-oriented effects. The other problem I have with this is that it's limited to 1 per turn. I don't really think that it would be all that powerful if it just got 3 counters and then you could just use them however you wanted. Granted, that would basically be kind of a time walk sort of effect where you would, essentially the runner would lose their next turn. But is that really an unreasonable power level for a 5-for-3 agenda? I feel bad that lots of my reviews for 5-for-3s kind of boil down to the same. It's bad to include 3-pointers in your deck. It's hard to score 5-for-3s. This ability isn't good enough. One of the biggest things that I think that the card pool needs is a higher percentage of playable agendas. There are so many agendas in Netrunner that are absolutely awful and never see any play. And unfortunately, I think this is just another one where the effect is not strong enough. It's just not good enough. Next up, we have the first of a cycle in this pack. This is a new asset for HB. It's called Clone Suffrage Movement. It's 1 to res, it's 2 to trash, it's political subtype, and that's the cycle I'm talking about. It's 2 influence. When your turn begins, you may add 1 operation from archives to HQ if there is no ice protecting this server. I am really enthusiastic about this new cycle of assets. They're all going to share the political mechanic, which is the if there are no ice protecting this server aspect. And for me, that is an absolutely brilliant conditional effect. This is the type of thing I'd like to see more of in the game. More game state-based conditional effects. This is really smart, and I really like this. Now, this has an obvious weakness that if there are no ice defending it, it's only going to be 2 to trash. So I think if you're really reliant on a card like this to have a good effect, you're going to either have ways to recur it, which HB has. There's always archive memories or reclamation order, or of course we also have team sponsorship as a way to get it back. But I think the better option is going to be increasing the trash cost of this card. So, of course, we have Encryption Protocol, but there's also Oaktown Grid. Both of these are in faction. Now, the mother of all increasing trash effects is in Industrial Genomics. And a bunch of these political cards are going to be absolutely hot for different builds of Industrial Genomics. The ability to pump up the trash cost sky high of something like this is going to really make it easier to utilize the no ice thing. And all around, I think that's going to be the best way to play all of these political cards kind of across the board. Now, returning an operation, that's good. Of course, it's going to be able to get us like burst stuff, just like a hedge fund or whatever, maybe peak efficiency in HB. Now, within Industrial Genomics, we have, of course, Mushin Notion. That would be a really solid option. Being able to spam a ton of Mushin Notions would be really good. That's kind of already what you're doing with the deck. Similarly, Neural EMP would be a good card to be able to do on a consistent basis. So I think this definitely has some playability. The first place that my mind went with it is Industrial Genomics. And I think I would be a little more excited about this in that deck if there weren't even better cards later in the pack for Industrial Genomics. Next up, we have Jinteki's entry in this cycle. This is Bioethics Association. It's 1 to res, 2 to trash, it's 2 influence, it's political, and it's an asset. When your turn begins, do 1 net damage if there is no ice protecting this server. When I first saw this card, I actually stood up out of my chair and let out like a holler. I mean, this card is absolutely insane. I definitely expect this to see play right out of the pack, and I definitely think it's the best of the political cards. I can't imagine a better sort of win condition card for Industrial Genomics. This is exactly the thing that deck has been looking for a long time, and I really, really strongly expect this card to push Industrial Genomics into Tier 1 if it wasn't already there. Now, most of the genomics decks that I've seen are doing kind of the Museum of History, Mombad Temple thing, where they have a lot of recursion with the Museum of History, and they have lots of recurring credits with the Temple, and they're able to just slowly accumulate assets, installing them turn after turn. You're going to have something like Hostile Infrastructure, as well as the ID ability to protect your assets. And when you have so much recursion with like Museum of History, you're going to be able to reinstall this thing, even if the runner manages to trash it. If you stopped playing imps, you probably want to get them back out, maybe Scrubber or something like that. This is definitely going to be a monster in Industrial Genomics. It's going to single-handedly be a way that you can win the game long-term, and I think it's really going to create the first sort of prison archetype that's really ever existed in Netrunner. I've already seen some groaning and grumbling about the Industrial Genomics deck, and for me, I just don't think that's justified. Mass asset decks should work kind of like that deck, and I think that the Industrial Genomics deck is a lot fairer and more interesting than Near Earth Hub. Near Earth Hub uses mass assets as kind of a smokescreen to cheese out a bunch of points. Whereas this deck, it's not going to be very good at scoring. It's going to rely a lot more on interacting pieces of its assets, and it's going to slowly build up a sort of winning game state over time. That's the way these mass asset decks should work, and I think that this is going to really push genomics forward, and I really welcome that. It's a really weird, different deck, and it really shows the diversity of archetypes that are possible within Netrunner. Next up, we have another asset for Jinteki. This is Political Dealings. This is 4 to res, it's 3 to trash, it's 4 influence. It's an asset, and it's seedy. When you draw an agenda, you may reveal it. Man, here's another card that I think is really doing some great things. This is the way that I would like more fast advanced style tools to work. It's going to be really easy to deal with as the runner because it's a 3 to trash asset. But at the same time, it's going to give you the ability to draw a 3 for 2 and then just be able to install it and immediately score it that turn. So the way I'm envisioning this card working is that you're going to need to defend it. You're going to have like one remote where you're defending it with ice, and then you're going to be able to hopefully draw your agendas and score them out. Now we have Brain Trust and Philotic Entanglement just as 3 for 2s, so those are definitely a possibility. There's also Medical Breakthrough, which after the first one has been stolen will be a 3 for 2 or a 2 for 2. It's also hypothetically possible to use this in a biotech deck in order to score a 4-pointer, because you could use the 4 advancement reverse side to install after you've drawn, like a Nisei or something, and then advance it 4 times and score it. The other idea that I thought about was Harmony Medtech, since you'd only need 3 2-pointers to win the game, and the deck's a little bit smaller, so it's gonna be easier to include kind of the premium agendas in that deck. The deck that I'm thinking about with this is going to just defend 1 remote with Ice and like Caprice or maybe Marcus Beatty, and then you're going to play 3 for 2s and other agendas that you can easily score with this. I think that's definitely a really awesome way to design a fast advanced tool, And I think this card is generally one of the most interesting fast advanced type effects that we've seen in the history of the game. Next up, we have a new operation for Jinteki. This is Clones Are Not People. It's 3 to play, it's 3 influence, it's a current, and that means it's not trashed until another current is played, or the runner steals an agenda. When you score an agenda, add Clones Are Not People to your score area as an agenda worth 1 agenda point. This is kind of interesting, but I'm pretty meh on it. It's definitely cool to see new ways to get points that aren't agendas. I think that's an aspect of the game that I'd like to see more cards designed for. And especially on the Corp side of the game, we don't have a whole lot of tools like that. This is a pretty sweet way to do it. Now, unfortunately, it's going to be really hard to use. We do have a 2-for-1 that could trigger it, and you could potentially maybe like motion an agenda after you play this to make it like easier to score agendas. But I think overall, this is just really, really pricey to get that extra point. An offer you can't refuse is similar in some ways, and I don't think that card's really seen a whole lot of play, mainly because it's really expensive. And the way I see it is this is an even more difficult to use, kind of harder tool that does a similar thing. So I don't know. The most positive thing I'll say about this is that if you play Global Food and Future Perfect, which are the 2 best 5-for-3s, this could be your 7th point, and that might be kind of okay. Next up, we have NBN's entry in the political lineup. This is Sensi Actors Guild. It's 0 to res, it's 2 to trash, it's 2 influence. It's political. When your turn begins, you may draw 3 cards if there is no ice protecting this server. If you do, add 1 card from HQ to the bottom of R&D. I think this definitely gives Daily Business Show a run for its money. It is 2 to trash versus 4, but it's 0 to res, which is nice, and the being able to draw 3 cards, even if you just do that like 1 time, that's going to be pretty hot. This is another one of those cards that I think is looking forward to a post-Jackson Howard environment. This is the type of effect that I think they're starting to assign to a bunch of different cards, and that's exactly the way that I want them to handle the rotation out of Jackson Howard. I think that the dealing with agenda flood type cards should be distributed among many effects rather than just being attached to 1 card. And this is definitely something that could help you against the agenda floods, especially early. Near Earth Hub's going to like this because you're going to get to draw a card. I think overall this is a pretty decent card that I expect to maybe see play as like a 1 or 2 of in like NEH or that style of deck. Next up, we have Wayland's entry in the political lineup. This is Commercial Bankers Group. It's 1 to res, it's 2 to trash, it's 2 influence. It's an asset and it's political. When your turn begins, gain 3 credits if there is no ice protecting this server. Well, of course, the Wayland one just has some generic economy effect that they've already got a million cards that do that sort of thing. That said, I think this could see some play, especially in Gagarin. That deck, I think, has been inching towards playability, especially with this pack and a bunch of really hot assets. We've seen a lot of good stuff, with the Museum of History and the Mombad Temple and that kind of thing. So I really think that this could be pretty good in the right build of Gagarin. But outside of that, lots of other decks have drip economy. I definitely don't think Genomics is going to want to use this since you could just play like Sundew or something. So I don't know, I think all around this is Gagarin or nothing. I have to admit that I'm a little disappointed that the Wayland card in this cycle is just some boring thing. Oh look, it makes some credits. I've never seen a Wayland card that does that before. Next up we have another asset for Wayland. This is Mombad City Hall. It's 1 to res, 3 to trash, it's 1 influence. It's an asset and it's a facility government. It has click, search R&D for an alliance card, reveal it, and play or install it paying all costs. Shuffle R&D. Man, here is another really sweet asset. This pack is just on fire with cool assets. The biggest thing that I'm seeing with this is both Mombad Temple and Museum of History are alliance. So if you're playing one of these heavy asset decks, especially out of genomics, and you want some way to get those cards out of your deck, get them installed, do stuff for you right away, this is a way to do it. And not only do you get to tutor the card, you also get to immediately play or install it. So that makes this way, way stronger. It's one influence, so you're going to be able to include it in a genomics deck without a whole lot of issue. Now, you could potentially do the same thing out of Gagarin, but I don't know. I think Gagarin is probably going to get overshadowed by genomics. I wanted to point out that in my last review, I was talking about product recall as an interesting one or two of for genomics, because you could potentially have a really huge burst credit card. That is also an alliance card. So if you're already playing enough of the HB cards to meet the alliance requirement, or if you just have 2 extra influence, I think product recall would be a pretty sweet one of, especially if you're already playing this Mombad City Hall to tutor it up. Another thing to mention is that Heritage Committee is alliance. So if you play one of those in your genomics deck, maybe later in the game, if you have agendas stuck in HQ, you could just tutor up the Heritage Committee, play it, put it on top of the deck, and then you could use Mombad to shuffle the deck again. That's kind of cool. I really like this card. I anticipate this is only going to get better over time as we see more alliance cards, and I definitely think this is good enough to see a little bit of play. Next up, we have a piece of ice for Wayland. This is Bailiff. It's a 2-res, 0 strength barrier. It's 2 influence. Whenever the runner breaks a subroutine on Bailiff, gain a credit. Then it has 1 sub of end the run. This little thing doesn't seem like a whole lot. It's maybe not the most exciting card, but for me, this represents a huge paradigm shift in ice design, and I am pumped. This is, first of all, a Wayland barrier that does something other than ending the run. And I have said many, many times that Wayland just needs barriers that do something that isn't just, look, it ends the run. This does that. It's going to be this sort of pop-up window kind of effect where you're going to get kind of some drip economy as they get through it. But the other thing that's really critical about this is one of the first cards we've seen that does something that's non-subroutine based on them breaking ice. And I've said many, many times that I think ice need to do things outside of subroutines, that there's lots of areas of the timing structure that haven't been explored with ice abilities. We've pretty much only seen when encountered, and here is a when they break it. That's great. I absolutely love that. And I really hope that this isn't just a one-shot, one-of thing. That I hope that they think more about using effects like this, more areas of the timing structure, more areas of the interaction, other than just when encountered. I really like this thing. I anticipate this seeing play, mainly because it's a cheap way to stop the runner early game, and then it's going to be a little bit of a drip economy action later in the game. This card is great, and it makes me really hopeful about the future of ice design. The last card in the pack is a Wayland upgrade. This is Surat City Grid. It's 2 to res, it's 3 to trash, it's 2 influence. It's an upgrade region. Whenever you res a card in or protecting this server, not including itself, you may res another card, lowering the res cost by 2. Limit 1 region per server as they all are. This isn't blowing me away, but I do think that it could maybe see a little bit of play. Out of Gagarin especially, I think this could maybe be okay. The big thing and the obvious limitation with this is that you're going to have stuff to res, especially stuff that costs 2. And while you can use this to res ice potentially on another server, I don't necessarily see that as being worth including the card in your deck. So for me, it's going to be kind of predicated on having assets or upgrades that have at least the cost of 2 so that you have good targets for this thing. I've seen at least one person suggest using this as maybe a solution to blackmail, where you'd be able to res ice outside of just the normal context of being able to res ice when they run the server. That's a really useful thing against blackmail, because a lot of times the first time they run the server that they're using blackmail against is with blackmail, so you're not going to have an opportunity to res prior to that. But if you wanted to do that, I think that Executive Boot Camp is just a much better way to do that. And for me, this just isn't good. It's not going to be good enough to include this card for that reason. That's going to do it for my review of Democracy and Dogma. I think from a design perspective, this is one of the most interesting packs that we've seen for a long time. There are a few stinkers, but there's a lot of stuff exploring the edges of the design space, and even the cards where I think that they're not that great, they're at least doing something interesting that isn't just like a duplicative effect that you can do with basically a ton of other cards. I really like Political. I think that's a really smart design. I'm a big fan of some of these solutions to Caprice. I think that's going to be really good on the runner side of the game. And all around, I think that this is a must-buy pack. It's definitely a must-buy pack if you're playing Industrial Genomics because you've got like a whole box of toys. But I think there's going to be a little bit of something for most decks in this pack. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe and press the button that looks like a thumbs up. And leave me a comment and let me know about the cards I was right or wrong about. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again for some more Netrunner stuff.